It was obviously a big surprise and a delight to win the prize. I don't know if my life has changed. It has become very busy. Technological progress is an important element of human advancement, including how incomes rise and people become better off. But it's not the case that just because the technology has become more productive, that you will necessarily get shared prosperity. Digital advertising is very bad because it makes you upset, it grabs your attention, it manipulates your emotions. It's bad for mental health, it's very bad for children, and it's terrible for democracy because it encourages people to be really angry and not listen to each other. So I think there should be, and we're proposing a very high tax on digital advertising, which would mostly fall on Meta and Google, and a little bit on Amazon. If AI increases this job market polarization and pushes more people down and a few people up, that doesn't lead in the good direction. And that's creating a real pressure on our institutions, including the democracy.
Dr. Simon Johnson, I'd like to thank you for coming to an interview. Before we begin, for our Korean audience, I would like to give a quick rundown on your background. So first, you teach entrepreneurship at MIT Sloan School of Management. And during 2007 and 8, you were chief economist and director of research at IMF. I think that was during global financial crisis. I used to work for U.S. investment bank back then, running Korea's business. And recently, you received the Nobel Prize in Economic Science, together with Darren Acemoglu, your colleague at MIT, and with James Robinson at University of Chicago, for studies on how institutions are formed and affect prosperity. So first, congratulations. I think the announcement was made on October 14th. And just a couple of days before, on October 10th, Korean female writer called Han Gang, she did won Nobel Prize in Literature. It was quite a big thing in Korea. So my first question is, what was it like on that day? And I know MIT has many Nobel Prize winner, like my alma mater, University of Chicago. But has your life changed after becoming winning this prize? Probably this is a very easy question.
I mean, it was obviously a big surprise and a delight to win the prize. I don't know if my life has changed. It has become very busy the past few weeks. So I haven't really had time to think about if it's changed. I think probably not much, but it's still a fantastic honor.
But you still spend a lot of hours doing a research, teaching students, doing a lot of work with your colleagues. So your daily life is still same?
Oh, yes, absolutely. MIT expects me to go to class and to still continue with the teaching. And of course, and the research is just invigorated by this kind of recognition. So it's very helpful to the research agenda, I would say.
Okay, thank you. So together with Dr. Acemoglu, you published a book last year called Power and Progress. I actually, read it. It was very impressive. And it has a subtitle, Our 1,000-Year Struggle Over Technology and Prosperity. So what is the key message here, particularly for our Korean audience?
Yeah, I think the key message is actually quite relevant for South Korea, among other places, which is technological progress is an important element of human advancement, including how incomes rise and people become better off. But it's not the case that just because the technology has become more productive, that you will necessarily get shared prosperity. That can happen. It should happen. We want that to happen. But there are some other pieces that need to be in place. And so the book is about episodes in world history when we've got more shared prosperity from technological progress. And then it asks the question, what is likely to happen in this age of artificial intelligence? And are there ways that we could get better outcomes for more people if we push the technology in one way versus another way?
And when you say prosperity, what do you mean and how do you measure that?
So the obvious way to measure prosperity is in terms of people's incomes. Obviously, you need to be careful and to recognize that their health also matters. and it matters the pressure that they're under, living conditions, and so on and so forth. But the key point is the shared prosperity, I would say. So we're looking for and hoping for, and at least our group is pushing for more people to rise up. But the rising tide lifts all boats, of course, is a very famous cliche, but it's not, unfortunately, automatic. It's not what always happens in historical episodes. So we're trying to argue for and help build the conditions under which improved technology will help essentially, hopefully, all people.
So the shared prosperity is more correct word, and I think your conclusion is relevant for rest of the world, and particularly countries like South Korea, where we have a tech-driven economy.
Yes, so South Korea is a fascinating, in many ways, success case. I understand you have complications and issues today, but the way in which South Korea has transformed itself since the 1950s, and particularly from the early 1960s, is absolutely remarkable. Many countries are very envious and would like to do something similar. And I think particularly your embrace of technology and early use of technology over the past 2 decades has been extremely impressive. So I think Korea has had phases, certainly, where prosperity has been more widely shared. I understand there may be concerns about that now, but most other countries, most other lower income countries would be delighted to have some experience like that in South Korea.
I think Korea and Taiwan are the very interesting cases. You teach and your research interest, one of them is entrepreneurship, right? But it appears after reading your books, you are quite skeptical about technological development's impact on gains for the ordinary people. And I think one of the example you quoted was Mark Zuckerberg in, I think, first couple of pages, and you did compare with Chinese Community Party's dictatorship, right? Even though it's a little different example, that was a very interesting reference. So while real wages for the blue-collar workers have suffered, you show some evidence. But hasn't the living standard and the working conditions for most people got better? So you don't agree to my observation? I go back to the US quite often, and that's my observation when I look at the ordinary people who are working at the retail stores or at the shops.
Well, actually, the data show that while since the 1960s, real weekly earnings for men with a lot of education, it's gone up steadily and by quite a lot. In the middle, it's been moderate increases, but a lot of downward pressure on the availability of those jobs. And at the low end, in terms of the wages of people who didn't go to college or didn't finish high school, those real wages have not gone up much at all over 40 or 50 years. So I think, the term that my colleague David Autor at MIT has really made very salient and is absolutely right, is polarization. And he talks about job market polarization, meaning there's a pole at the top that's done very well. There's a pole at the bottom that exists, and there is jobs. We don't have mass unemployment in the US, but we don't have a lot of wage growth. And the people in the middle, many of them got pushed down by automation, by globalization, by the decline of trade unions. So the rise of these two extremes or polar opposites or polarization is, I think, unfortunately, the right concept to describe what happened to the US labor market.
Okay, I mean, that makes sense. But the US economy these days are really driven by a couple of large tech firms in the Silicon Valley, and they're called the big tech, and one of them is the Meta and Google, Apple, and the couple of big tech companies. So do you think as a society or the regulators should play a more active role in reshaping the strategy of these big tech companies? And do you think there is a fundamental risk about these companies moving forward?
Yes, I think there's a couple of risks. One is on the development of artificial intelligence. I think they have so much data and so much control over the data you need to train the models, as well as capital, perhaps, that they may end up, essentially monopolizing a key element of the future economy, and that could be a problem. I think, in addition, digital advertising is very bad because it makes you upset, it grabs your attention, it manipulates your emotions. It's bad for mental health, it's very bad for children, and it's terrible for democracy because it encourages people to be really angry and not listen to each other. So I think there should be, and we're proposing a very high tax on digital advertising, which would mostly fall on Meta and Google and a little bit on Amazon. They're most of the $500 billion a year world market. That would not necessarily force them to break up, for example. It would force them to change their business model. I think it's the business model that's really damaging in that regard.
And you believe that the government should take more active intervention or ask for a breakup or, be more serious about these development?
Look, we allow people to smoke tobacco and use tobacco, even though it's very bad for their health, but we tax it heavily. We know that junk food is very bad for you, and it creates a lot of health problems that cost big money. And so we discuss putting bigger taxes on junk food. So digital advertising is like cigarettes and junk food. I don't think you can make it illegal. I don't advise that. But I think taxing it heavily and discouraging it for the big guys who are being massively abusive of people and children and democracy, I think that's appropriate, yes.
So you recommend using taxes to change their corporate strategy and behavior?
To discourage a particular business model. Look, I don't think the government should tell companies what to do. I think companies figure that out. I think you do want to allow competition. And I do worry about monopolization in the AI development business. But assuming we can get enough competition there, you can let companies decide for themselves. But when companies do things like pollution, massive pollution, right? We absolutely discourage that. We penalize them or use monetary penalties in various fashions to discourage it. So it is appropriate for the government to care about health and safety of the population. And I think, honestly, the health and safety of the democracy is also currently at stake.
Okay, understood. I mean, in your book, you have a concern over two powerful forces in AI ecosystem. One is the OpenAI and Microsoft camp, and the other is Google and perhaps Anthropic, right? So you have a concern about the digital advertising, but in the era of AI, do you think the government should become more active, proactive, or should we be more worried about polarization or the some of the side effects of the couple of big tech companies?
Well, I think AI is a technology that will be very important across all parts of the economy. And in general, it's much better to have competition. And if we're talking about AI, which poses and is interpreted as being an authoritative source of information, like an oracle, then it's a very good question, who's behind this? When there are competing explanations of what happened in history, for example, who's making that decision? Now, if people have multiple AI sources they can look at and they can consult against each other like you do with Wikipedia, for example, and go look at the underlying data and information, I don't have a problem with that. I like Wikipedia. I don't rely on Wikipedia, but I use it as an access point for information. But AI has been presenting itself as authoritative, single source, don't need to check for yourself. And that's not good for human thinking. And I think it creates a gatekeeper power of knowledge and understanding the world that you don't really want to put in the hands of any individuals. And of course, it is individuals who control and own this AI software.
So I agree. I mean, it's a very useful tool that it could help the life of everyone, but we need to be very careful about the application, particularly to the younger people, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. A question about the productivity. I mean, the U.S. economy is sailing very smoothly. Third quarter GDP, I think it was up 2.8%. U.S., I think, is expected to grow around 2% in real terms over the next couple of years. Very structurally strong economy. And I think it's partly driven by productivity growth, right? But in your book, you mentioned that the excessive focus on automation past couple of decades have been bad for the workers, and it significantly increased the inequality. I think, you talk a lot about the inequality, particularly in the US. So what is your observation of the productivity gains in the US, and how should we handle that?
So what we try to explain in the book is there's a difference between what happens to average productivity, which is the general concept we focus on, and what's happening to marginal productivity, which means when you think about hiring one more worker, how much you're going to pay them. So think about your favorite grocery store or supermarket. Many of these grocery stores have now put self-checkout kiosks in, which you might like or you might hate. But what they've done is they've transferred the work from the workers to the customer, right? Now, when they do that, productivity goes up in the sense they don't need so many workers. They usually fire some workers. Usually their production or the sales in the grocery store are about the same, fewer workers. But they don't raise the wages of the remaining workers. Most of those workers have the same wages. And when they think about what's the additional value of hiring one more worker, that marginal productivity, the additional worker productivity has not gone up, so they don't get a high wage. And so what's happening here is the automation is delivering higher average productivity in that firm, but not higher marginal productivity. What you need to do is create new tasks, new things for humans to do that require expertise, because that's what you get paid for, expertise. You know, if you're doing something that could be done by anyone who's just hired off the street, you're not going to get a high wage. If you're doing something that is valuable to the company and to the market, and it takes years of training, then you get paid a decent wage. So that's what we're missing is we're missing, or we need more new task creation to counterbalance the automation that's going to happen anyway.
I mean, listening to what you say, I mean, doesn't it really mean that we need to review the corporate governance, how these private sector companies make decisions, and review the ultimate objective of these companies? Because according to the shareholder theory, companies exist to maximize value for the shareholders, and they've got a very simple mandate. And are you proposing that we should revisit that agenda?
Yes, I think that if you go back in history and look at the thinking of leading American industrialists in the 1920s, they say things like, America is strong because our workers are productive, we pay them high wages, they develop more skills, and they buy the goods that we produce. So if you're squeezing the workers, if the workers are a cost to be minimized, and the goal of the companies is to drive people out of the middle class, essentially, who's going to buy your goods?
It's a combination of a shareholder theory, but embracing more stakeholder theory. And it goes back to Milton Friedman's doctrine, I think 1970.
Yeah, look, I think that Friedman thought or intervention, which was a magazine article, was highly influential and rather extreme and caused some problems. I mean, if you regard the people in your organization as a resource to be developed, and as a way that you build a bigger, stronger company, that's treating workers properly and making sure their skills improve and persuading them to adopt new technology, that can be completely consistent with shareholder value. The problem is the interpretation of shareholder value that says workers are a cost, drive them down, down, down. That, I think, when you apply that to the level of the system or the country as a whole, it rather becomes self-defeating, because now you have no middle class, no purchasing power in the hands of your workers, and you can't develop the market because who are you going to sell to?
Yeah, and you think that the US has gone a little too far in that direction?
I think we've gone a lot too far in that direction. What I really worry about is that AI will take us further. I think that Mr. Trump's first presidency and his run for the election now is based on anger and resentment, which is partly caused by the fact the middle class has been squeezed so badly. I think Mr. Trump's policies make no sense, his proposals, but that's a different matter. But there is genuine anger there. I think, and that's creating a real pressure on our institutions, including the democracy. I think we can withstand this. I hope we can. But if AI makes it worse, if AI increases this job market polarization and pushes more people down and a few people up, that doesn't lead in the good direction.
Understood. I mean, last question. I mean, particularly for our Korean readers and audience. I mean, Korea, we have been a very dynamic economy. I think per capita GDP reached $35,000 on par with Japan. That's pretty impressive. But we've got our own problems. One of them is slowing growth. So the long-term sustainable growth has fallen below 2%. Per annum. And one of more critical problem for our society is rapidly aging populations. If we look at our country's fertility, it's about 0.7, which is by far the lowest in the world. So what kind of advice would you have for our people and for our regulators?
I am very careful in what I say to other countries since I left the IMF. My wife's parents were born in Korea. And when I became chief economist at the IMF, my father-in-law, who very sadly passed away a few years ago, he sent me a short email that said, "Please be nice to Korea." So I always have been. And I think Korea has achieved an enormous amount, and I'm really, honestly, very impressed. And so are many people around the world are very envious. But you do have some pressing issues, and you're quite right that the fertility rate is strikingly low in Korea, given, well, but by any comparison. So I think I don't have a magic answer. Haven't heard one from anyone. I think you have to look at what the root causes are, what the opinions are, who's making those decisions and why, and you have to see if you can address those with public policy. Otherwise, you will have a contracting native-born population, and that, as you say, would combine with the aging of the population. We see that in some other places. There's some of that in Japan. There's some of that in some parts of Europe. It's not easy anywhere where this happens. And I think automation can help some parts of your economy, but it doesn't help the caring part of your economy. You're not putting robots to work to care for the old people. That's not on the horizon. So there is a lot of difficult issues that are coming, not only for Korea, but for all societies, all these industrial societies that are aging quite quickly now.
Right. I mean, Dr. Johnson, I mean, that was a very interesting interview, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Real pleasure talking to you.
Okay, thank you.